There is a specific kind of silence that settles inside a house when something unspeakable has happened, but nobody will say it out loud. I grew up inside that silence. I learned to eat breakfast in it, to do homework in it, to smile through it at family dinners where my aunt would arrive with her daughter Madison on her hip, and the whole room would seem to lean forward like sunflowers toward a window. My name is Ethan Cole. I was born on a Tuesday in late October, and my mother, Diane Cole, cried when she saw me, or so she told me when I was 7, back when she still told me things like that. Back when she still thought I deserved the soft versions of the truth. I want to be careful here. I don't want to paint my mother as a villain, because that's not what she is, and this story is complicated enough without me flattening her into something easy to hate. But I also need to tell you what it felt like to grow up as the second choice in your own home. And so I'll start at the beginning, the real beginning, which was a summer afternoon when I was 11 years old and I overheard a phone call that I was never supposed to hear. My mother's sister is named Carol Whitfield. She married a man named Doug Whitfield who made good money in commercial real estate, and together they had one daughter, Madison Whitfield, who was born 8 months before me, who had blonde curls and an easy laugh, and who, I came to understand very early in life, occupied a place in my mother's heart that I somehow never managed to reach. I used to tell myself it was my imagination. Children do that. They gaslight themselves before they even know what gaslighting means. I'd noticed that my mother's voice changed when Madison called. I'd noticed that when the 4 of us went to the state fair and Madison wanted to ride the Ferris wheel twice, we rode it twice, but when I wanted to stay longer at the game booths, we left because Mom was tired. Small things, the kind of things that individually mean nothing, but collectively form a portrait you can't stop seeing once you've seen it. The summer I was 11, my Aunt Carol was going through her divorce. Doug had left for a woman he'd met at a conference in Phoenix, and Carol was devastated, and Madison, who was 12 and already developing that particular teenage talent for being loudly present, was struggling. My mother, naturally, threw herself into helping. She drove to Carol's house 3 times a week. She cooked casseroles and dropped them off. She organized the paperwork, attended mediation sessions with Carol, babysat Madison on the weekends. None of this was wrong. It was generous, even. But I was 11, and my father was away for work most of that summer. He traveled for a software company, and so what I mostly experienced was a mother who moved through our house like a ghost, physically present but mentally already across town, already in Carol's living room, already focused on Madison. That July afternoon, I came home from a friend's house earlier than expected. The front door was unlocked, and as I pushed it open, I heard my mother's voice from the kitchen, low and tight in the way she only spoke when she thought no one could hear. "I know, Carol. I know. She's mine too, in a way. You know that." I stood in the hallway. My sneakers were still on. I could feel the summer heat radiating off my back from the door I'd pushed open. No, I'm not saying, of course Ethan is my son. I'm not saying that, but Madison needs me right now. And I feel things for her that I can't always explain. I left. I walked back down the porch steps and sat on the lawn for a long time, watching the neighbor's sprinkler tick back and forth in the heat. She's mine too, in a way. I didn't understand what that meant. I was 11, but something inside me folded itself up very carefully, like a letter being placed into an envelope, and I carried it with me for the next 15 years. Let me tell you about Madison, because this story isn't fair to tell without her. She was not cruel to me. That's the frustrating part. It would have been easier if she had been. She was the kind of person who was simply good at being lovable, warm, energetic, funny in a loud way that filled rooms, generous with compliments, the first person to notice if someone at a party seemed left out. As we got older and the family dynamic became something I'd quietly accepted as permanent, I found myself unable to resent her. She hadn't done anything. She didn't even seem to notice that my mother treated her differently. Or if she noticed, she never mentioned it to me. We grew up seeing each other at holidays and summer weekends, at birthday parties that always felt, to me, like performances I was expected to applaud. My mother beamed at Madison's academic achievements, at her participation in community theater, at her admission to the University of Michigan. She beamed at my achievements too. I'm not saying she didn't, but there was a quality to the beam that was different. Like the difference between a lamp you turn on because the room is dark and a lamp you turn on because you love the light. I went to Ohio State. I studied journalism, which my mother supported with the particular brand of cautious encouragement she reserved for my choices. "That sounds good, Ethan. Just make sure you have something to fall back on," versus the unqualified delight she'd expressed when Madison announced she was pre-med. I graduated, got a job at a regional newspaper, moved to Columbus, and began what I privately thought of as the work of becoming someone who didn't need his mother's validation. I was spectacularly bad at this work for many years. The first real crack in the silence came when I was 26. My mother called me on a Wednesday night, which was unusual. She typically called on Sundays, and our conversations were warm enough but carefully contained. Weather, work, family updates, the occasional inquiry about whether I was seeing anyone. I had learned to match her register. I had learned not to ask for more than she was offering. But that Wednesday she called, and she sounded different. Shaky. "I need to tell you something," she said. "About Madison." My first thought, I'm ashamed to say, was irrational. Did something happen to her? And then, right behind it, why is Madison still the first thing in this phone call? "She's fine," my mother said, before I could ask. "She's fine. But she called me today, and she told me something, and I've been sitting with it for hours, and I think I need to talk to you." What Madison had told my mother was this: she had always known, from the time she was a teenager, that my mother loved her in a way that seemed different from how she loved her own children. She had never asked about it. She had assumed, as children do, that it was simply the nature of their relationship, something to be grateful for and not examine too closely. But now she was 27, she was in therapy, and her therapist had gently pressed her on the family dynamics, and Madison had started asking questions. She had asked Carol, and Carol had told her the truth. The truth took my mother almost 40 minutes to get through on the phone. She kept stopping. She kept saying she was sorry, which confused me because I didn't yet know what she was apologizing for. I sat on my apartment floor with my back against the couch and listened to my mother dismantle the story of my childhood piece by piece, and by the end of it I was very still. Here is what she told me. Before I was born, before she was Diane Cole, my mother was Diane Hartley. And before she was Diane Hartley, at 19 years old, she had a daughter. The pregnancy was unplanned. The father was a man named Robert Marsh, who was 22 and not ready, and who made that lack of readiness clear in ways that were unkind and definitive. My mother was in college, working part-time at a restaurant, living in a cramped apartment with 2 roommates. She was, by her own description, terrified. She carried the pregnancy to term. She gave the baby up for adoption. The baby was placed with a couple in Michigan. The couple's last name, through a chain of circumstances that my mother described as the most painful coincidence of her life, was Whitfield. The baby was Carol Whitfield's daughter. The baby was Madison. I need you to understand what I felt when I heard this, because the feeling was not simple. My first reaction was not anger. It wasn't even surprise, exactly. It was more like the sensation of a blurry photograph suddenly coming into focus. She's mine too, in a way. The phone call I'd overheard at 11. The way my mother's eyes tracked Madison across every room. The casseroles and the mediation sessions and the Ferris wheel. All of it arriving at once, reorganizing itself into something that made a terrible, aching sense. My second reaction was grief. Not for myself, not yet, but for my mother. I thought about her at 19, alone and scared, making the hardest decision of her life. I thought about what it must have been like to watch her daughter grow up across town in her sister's house, to hold that secret for decades, to love from a distance that was close enough to hurt. My third reaction took longer to arrive, and it arrived in pieces over the following weeks. It was something between understanding and devastation. Because here is what the revelation also meant. I had not been imagining it. The love my mother had given Madison was different from the love she gave me. Not because she didn't love me, but because Madison was bone of her bone, and I was her son, and those are different things. And my mother, for all her goodness, for all her love, I had never quite managed to keep that difference invisible. I drove home to see her that weekend. My mother opened the door before I'd finished walking up the porch steps. She looked older than she had at Christmas. She was wearing a cardigan, even though it was warm, and her hands were clasped in front of her, and she looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before, pure, undefended fear. I hugged her. I don't know why. It wasn't a conscious decision. I just did it, and she made a sound against my shoulder that I don't think I'll ever forget, like something that had been held tight for a very long time finally letting go. We sat in the kitchen. She made coffee. We talked for 5 hours. She told me everything. The year she was 19. Robert Marsh, who she hadn't seen since. The adoption agency. The agreement, closed at first, but she had found out years later, through a series of small and terrible coincidences, that the family who'd adopted her daughter had become the family her sister married into. That Madison was her child. She had known since Madison was 3 years old. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" I asked. She wrapped both hands around her mug. "Because it would have destroyed everything," she said. "Carol. The adoption. Madison herself. I kept thinking, the kindest thing I could do was love her quietly. And me," I said. "Was I the thing that got in the way of that?" She flinched. And to her credit, she didn't flinch away from the question. "No," she said. "But I think I sometimes let you feel like you were. And I'm sorry, Ethan. I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to separate it. I thought I was keeping a secret. I didn't realize I was making you carry it." There are things that happened after that conversation which I will not detail here, because they belong to other people. Carol had to reckon with what she knew. Madison had to decide what she wanted to do with a truth she had only just received. There were family meetings, and some shouting, and one very long Thanksgiving that I would not wish on anyone. Madison and I talked privately once, about 6 months after everything came out. We met at a coffee shop in Columbus, halfway between her city and mine. She arrived looking like herself, warm, uncertain, trying to smile, and we sat across from each other with the weight of our whole childhoods between us. "I didn't know," she said. "I want you to know that." I had no idea she knew. "I know," I said. "I believe you." "Does it change things?" she asked. "For you and me?" I thought about that for a while. About all the family dinners. About the Ferris wheel. About being 11 years old on a lawn in July, holding a question I didn't have words for yet. "You're still my cousin," I said finally. "Nothing changes that. But you're something else now. And I don't know what word to use for it yet." She nodded. Her eyes were wet. "Me neither," she said. "I'm 31 now. My mother and I talk twice a week. The conversations are different. Less contained, more honest, occasionally still difficult. She came to Columbus last spring, and we went to a baseball game and ate terrible hot dogs, and she laughed at something I said in a way that was different from how she used to laugh. Fuller, like she'd finally stopped being careful. Madison is in her residency in Chicago. We text sometimes. Not constantly, but enough. She sends me pictures of her niece, Carol's granddaughter, and I send her articles I think she'd find interesting. We are building something new out of the rubble of the old thing, which is slow and imperfect and, I think, genuinely worth doing. I have been thinking a lot lately about secrets, about how we carry them with the best intentions to protect the people we love, to prevent the kind of pain we can already see coming, and how they become the pain anyway, only slower and more dispersed. How my mother held her secret for 3 decades and thought she was sheltering everyone in it, while we were all, in our various ways, drowning. I don't blame her. I want to say that clearly. Understanding a thing is not the same as excusing it, but it's also not the same as condemning it. And I've made my peace or something close to peace with the mother I actually had, rather than the one I used to think I deserved. What I had wasn't nothing. It was love, real and imperfect, and complicated by grief she couldn't share, filtered through a secret that had calcified into the very architecture of her heart. It was love that sometimes looked like I was second. It was love that I spent years trying to earn without knowing the rules had never been about earning. I know the rules now, and somehow in the strange, difficult, unromantic way that real life tends to resolve things rather than conclude them knowing feels like enough.